cats who were scheduled to come home in a month or two didn't live to see that. And I was one of the fortunate ones who was able to come home, what sustained us was the fact that in a few months you're going home, and when that time nears, and you're going home, that was the greatest moment of my young life. Is to get on that plane and to look out that window and see the trees of Vietnam flying behind you. That's the greatest feeling in the world.
One point before you depart Vietnam, what did you guys do for, let's say, off-duty pursuits or recreation or downtime, doing while you were in the country per se?
Well, it depends on where you were, and it depends on whether you were on standby or ready alert. If you were not on standby or ready alert, you had an opportunity to play cards with your buddies. If you're back in the rear, now what we call the rear meaning out of the front line. If you're on the front line, buddy, there's nothing to do but be continuously alert. You're sort of like an eagle or a bird, always looking around you. And your buddies are watching your back while you're watching their back. But when you come from the front line back to the rear, then you have a chance to relax. Depending on where you were, still, mind you, snipers were everywhere. Snipers were your greatest enemy, regardless of whether you were on the front line or in the rear. Okay, but you still could relax to a degree. And our relaxation, we played cards, or some guys had chess or checkers, and then you have a chance to write letters home to your loved ones, or you just relax. And they at one point sent us. We were stationed back at a place called Tuiwa. Tuiwa is right on the ocean front, and to get a chance to walk out on the ocean and just look across the water and dream that you're back home. America is always on the other side of that ocean. And to look across that water and to just dream of the day that plane lands and you arrive back home. Sometimes you can live within the dream.
All right. And I know you've indicated that you communicate by way of the letter, that you back and forth to home. That was
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Did they typically have mail call while you were out on the front line?
No. Well, you're not going to get no mail call out on the front line. But when you're back in the rear, the military did their very best to get you your mail. And to get a letter from your mother, your father, your brothers, or your sisters, or your girlfriend, it's like a gift from Santa Claus.
Okay. Now we reached the point where you can look in the countries behind you. You're headed home. So did you take off from Saigon? Or,
yes.
And headed so you can tell us about from Saigon coming forward.
Depending on where the plane was scheduled to stop, I think we stopped in Anchorage, Alaska. For refueling, and then from there to my point of return, where we landed back in the United States, was at South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
And when I got off that plane, I literally knelt down and kissed the ground. Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
So you were one happy young man?
Yes, I was. Yes, I was.
So you were what, 19 by this time?
About 18. 18? Yeah, going on 19. Yeah.
So you're playing all the way from the same plane from Saigon to South Carolina?
No, we made some stops on the way, but one of the stops was Anchorage, Alaska, for refueling.
Okay.
And then from there to the United States.
On the same plane?
Yes, same plane. I flew back on what was a C-141, which was a plane that we had bodies and some injured people. And, we just, whatever they had available for you to fly back on. It wasn't a Burnett International that we flew over on. It was a military airlift command, which called MAC, M-A-C, Military Airlift Command.
So you had caskets on your plane?
Caskets.
C-141.
C-141 had caskets and some injured, and some, not injured. And from there, they would send us out to our, they would assign us to what's called a home unit. My home unit was Fort McClellan, Alabama. Fortunately for me, that was my home. Fort McClellan was about 10 miles from where I grew up. So that was great. That worked out for me. And so they assigned me there, which is a chemical school. And I worked in chemical supply. They gave me a job there working in chemical supply. And they allowed me to stay there until my time was up in the military, which was about 3 months later. And that's where I got out of the military, in Fort McClellan.
So you had Fort McClellan, and that was very short by then. You were getting out in June.
About 3 months.
About 3 months, Did your family know you were on your way home, and how did you feel?
No, I didn't tell them.
Oh, okay.
I didn't tell them. I wanted to surprise them.
Oh, okay.
And in doing so, it was a shock to them. They didn't know that I was home.
Tell us a little bit about that. Generally,
well, like you got to picture Alabama at that time. It was a small town. Everybody knew everybody. You just give a last name and everybody knew who you were. They knew who your parents were. They knew who your grandparents were. So I went home, and it was late at night, and I knocked on the door. My parents had no idea who it was. Now, back then, we didn't have air conditioning, so we had window fans. And I knocked on the door, and I could hear my parents saying, "Who's that?" And I sort of played a game on them. And my mother came to the door. She saw me standing there with my uniform on, and she just grabbed me and hugged. It was a big, rejoiceful occasion.
That is very emotional.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Have you, other friendships that you mentioned one friend that you currently have, but did you have any other bonding friendships that you had in Vietnam?
Yes. So many of my brothers. It would take me another hour to call off all those names, but the guys in my unit, if I could just see all of them one day, to have a reunion of all these guys. Because remember now, some of us were closer than some brothers and sisters. And when you're responsible for another man's life, you are more than brothers. It's hard to explain. It's a bond that God gives you. And you never forget these guys. I will never forget them as long as I live. I just hope and pray that before I leave this earth, the good Lord let me see some of them, but not all. And I don't know if some of them or the majority of them are living today. I don't know. But I just love to see some.
So, kind of winding down, this is, I'm going to ask a couple questions, maybe reflective. How did your wartime experience affect your life?
Well, let me start by saying nobody really wants to go to war. Nobody really wants war. I joined the military to serve my country. I happened to join during the Vietnam era war. I had a feeling that I would end up going to war, yet I didn't look forward to going to war. That experience to me was something that changed my life totally. Now, what I mean by that, me being an American, but first before becoming a veteran, before becoming a military person, I was a human being. I was a young man who was taught to be a Christian, growing up in southern rural Alabama. When you